everybody. This next part here in the Enchanted World series, we're going to do the lore of love. This talks about what the emotion of love has gotten, people, both regular humans and the supernatural, into all these years. And the tales that tell of that. Now, on the inside art, we have simply a glove. Looks like a very intricately woven glove. And we have a simple nobleman picking it up and returning it to the lady who owned it. And of course, in the end of this, excuse me. They wander off together. So, with that in mind, let's begin. Here we go. Destiny's Playthings, Chapter 1. Here we go. A groom from the Sea Lord's daughter. Enraptured by the charms of the Sea King's daughter, Thetis, the god of Poseidon, watched the nymph received her father's blessing. He resolved to claim her as his bride. When Poseidon brought word of Thetis' beauty home to Olympus, the highest of all gods resolved to see her for himself. Shifting into an eagle shape, Zeus found her dancing on the seashore and resolved that he, not Poseidon, should possess her. Oh, that old Zeus, him. Seriously. Quite a sick man, but this interesting picture here, see if I can get as much as I can while trying to read the text. Yeah, just a little bit. We'll get a little bits of parts here. A prophecy warned that Thetis would make a dangerous bride for any deity, so the gods chose mortal Peleus to wed her instead. To win her, he was compelled to hold her fast through a series of monstrous transformations. We see similar themes like this before, like in the story of Tam Lin from Fairies and Elves, I believe. There we go. A couple flowers, but no caption among that. There we go. You got a picture of some people with also some satyrs and centaurs. What's going on here? To celebrate the union of the mortal and the nymph, beings from every sphere of existence converged at the nuptial feast. Gods and goddesses, centaurs and satyrs, birds and beasts all came to do the couple honor. And I never read. I wonder if this is Orpheus. It says immortal. No, Peleus. That's right. Yeah. But, the story eventually ends. But here we got the god of marriages. But we see here a picture of Asian style here. Wandering in temple precincts at the hour of dawn, a young scholar met an old man passing a volume inscribed in an unknown script. The stranger introduced himself as a god of marriage. His book named every mortal's destined spouse. To show the young man his future bride, the god took him to a marketplace and pointed out a grubby toddler dressed in rags, ambitious for a match that would further his cause. The scholar was appalled. Wielding a dagger, a hired assassin stole into the market. He was commissioned to deflect destiny by murdering the child the god had chosen as the scholar's wife. Let's see. We have a picture here, but the text is something different. I don't know. I guess I could go ahead and let's see. Maiden's questions. And it has, unlike other texts, it kind of gives these little bold spots. Messages written on the wings of birds. Footsteps on the path of matrimony. Let's see. I'll read some of this and see what it gets me. From the earliest eras of recorded time, young girls sought to learn what they could about the future husbands with the aid of love divination. The bizarre rites they performed aimed to sum it up in a name, profession, whereabouts, even the physical appearance of the men they would, one day marry. Certain times the seasons were propitious for such tender necromancy. Midnight, for instance, was a visionary hour when, in silence and solitude, the bounds of the normal might blur. Certain days, too, were auspicious, among them St. Valentine's Day, May Day, Midsummer's Eve. In late January, the eve of St. Agnes, patron saint of virgins, was intimately associated with love. Girls would mix flour, water, eggs, and salt to bake a dumb cake, so called because it had been prepared in absolute silence. Then eat it before going to bed to induce dreams of their future betrothed. Oniromancy, foretelling the future through dreams, was one of the most common types of love divinations. Other forms used magic-imbued aspects of the natural world, fruit, birds, flowers, to call upon the images of the beloved in a mirror, or even to make him appear in person. If a girl had a specific suitor in mind, there were tests she could apply to gauge his ardor. A hazelnut placed on a grate might catch fire, signifying passion, or else crack, a sure sign of faithlessness. Let's see. Messages written on the wings of birds. A young girl could learn what trade her husband would follow by taking note of the first bird she saw on St. Valentine's morning. The blackbird was a somber with the somber features indicated a cleric. A jaunty robin, a sailor, and a shimmering goldfinch, a rich man. But a girl greeted by a woodpecker would never marry. Okay, there's a dirty joke in that somewhere. Maybe you can tell me in the comment section. Footsteps on the path of matrimony. A two-leaf clover placed in the maiden's right shoe was a potent agent of divination. The first man she chanced to meet upon walking out would either be her future husband or bear the same name. Preparing a meal for a future mate. A maiden who, in silence, prepared a feast on Christmas Eve would lure her future husband to her hearth, leaving the tables laid in the kitchen empty. The girl concealed herself nearby and waited for the sound of footsteps. If a man appeared and ate the supper, he would marry her within a year. But such dabbling in love magic during the winter, when the forces of darkness were most powerful, could bring misfortune. For her hiding place, a young man might catch sight of a monster with burning eyes devouring her handiwork, signaling that she was doomed to marry someone who would make her life a misery. Let's see. A nocturnal sortie of the churchyard. Churchyards, resting place of the dead, harbor potent magics. To walk around a church 12 times at midnight would give a girl a vision of her future mate. A Welsh servant lass looking for her lover was this way. Met her employer. Thinking him real and not an apparition, the girl blithely told her mistress of the meeting. The old woman paled with fear, for she believed in magic. Within a year she had died, and by the next, the servant was the widow's wife. Let's see. Sorry, I'm positioning this so I can read it. Perfume, rites that conjured reveries of love. Rose blossoms plucked into the midsummer eve and laid beneath a maiden's pillow gave off a nebula of dreams along with the sweet scents. The face and form of the dreamer's future husband would grace her sleep and stay with her when she rose, allowing her to recognize him when they met in their waking lives. Invoking a husband in a looking glass, a woman could glimpse her future partner in a mirror with the aid of an apple and a comb. First, she had to impale slices of the apple on a knife. Then, standing before the glass, she combed her hair with one hand while holding the knife over her left shoulder with the other. Her destined spouse would come into view, seeming to reach for the fruit. A man hidden here watching three women. Deep in the forest of India, a king, watched a lovely maiden and her two companions fetching water. As his eyes met the girls, a bond was forged that would, bring the pair both joy and anguish. Separated from his wife before the birth of his son, the king at last came upon the boy in the garden of a nymph's heavenly palace. This picture associated with the chapter on the previous page of the Cursed Embrace. And the caption reads, taking shelter in a half-ruined castle, a German knight came upon a portrait depicting an unknown lady beside an open grave. The image perturbed him as if she had some premonition of the part the lady would play in his fate. At the moment of uttering his marriage vows, Guntram felt the grasp of ghostly fingers. Then he saw that another dreaded face had replaced the countenance of his promised bride. A rendezvous in dreams. Arabian palace, yeah. Oh, and we got the... Okay, there's captions of these, so it keeps me reading the whole story. Manipulated by unseen beings, a princess who had forsworn love became enamored of a stranger. Let's see. The genie and the Ifrit, a female spirit, argued over the relative merits of their human proteges. When Badora declared her love for the foreign prince, her father dismissed her as a hopeless madwoman. The magician who came to cure Baldora's delusions proved to be her mysterious lover in disguise. When Badora slept, her bridegroom discovered a talisman concealed within her garments. At the Sultan's command, a band of sailors went ashore to capture the supposed thief of the amulet. The second marriage of the Queen and Al Ebony was celebrated with extravagant pomp and ceremony. That may have been tragic, that may have been a happy ending, don't know. As you go, always pick up the book and find out. Blighted Passions. Here we got something that's, don't find too much of. The looks like Central America. The Aztec couple's reunion in flames. An Aztec emperor offered his daughter's hand to a warrior who would conquer his enemies. Every warrior fought valiantly, fired with desire for the princess, but the soldier whose feet repulsed the invaders was he who truly loved her, Popocatépetl, or Petley, or Petal. Popocatépetl. Not used to pronouncing these 7 names. Very epic scene here. After his beloved was tricked into taking her own life, the sorrowing Popocatépetl built a pyramid in her memory, bearing a flaming torch to the summit of another pyramid. He became one with the rock, an ever-burning volcano. Let's see. Recipes for romance. A little picture here. Each one is number 1 through 9. I guess it's talking about how plants or animals are associated with magic and such. Let's see. Homeopathic principles of leading like, trying to stimulate desire. Let's go over some of these, maybe all of them. Let's see what happens. 1. The fruitful and evergreen orange tree, a symbol of marriage since the days of ancient Greece, provided a remedy for unrequited love. Wise folks said that if its fruit was thoroughly pricked with a needle, held under a man's arm overnight, it would inspire passion in any woman who ate it. So love potions. Number 2. Witches concocted to gullible customers improbable amalgams that alleged to arouse overwhelming passion in the heart of anyone who ate them. One recipe would include the dried and ground liver of a pigeon and the brain of a blackbird. The resulting powder was sprinkled over the loved one's food. Okay, I'll skip the rest of these, and we kind of get the idea. I'll probably read this story, though. It looks like a very dramatic scene. The Stone Avenger. From the rainy hills of Galicia to the sun-bleached Andalusian shores, Spaniards listened spellbound to the tales of a Moorish grandee named Don Juan and his assaults on female virtue. While other men of his time explored the great oceans, braving tempests to redraw the maps of the continents and the charts of the seas, Don Juan was quite content to remain at home, navigating from lace-trimmed petticoat to starched farthingale, always one step ahead of his conquests, enraged fathers, brothers, and lovers. But there came a time when Don Juan went too far in seduction and led to murder. One fateful night he disguised himself as a fiancé of the proud and beautiful Donna Ana of Seville. In her dark bedchamber, the deception went unnoticed. Too late, the lady realized that the man she embraced was an impostor. Her cries brought her father to her aid. Half dressed and with a sword drawn, Don Gonzalez made ready to kill the man who had betrayed his daughter's honor. As their shadows danced on the wall of the bedchamber, the two men rent the night with a clash of steel. Amid the parry and thrust, Don Juan's blade found its mark, mortally wounding its adversary. Escaping from the palace, Don Juan fled to the countryside. The city and his pleasures were potent magnet, however, and he soon returned to Seville, hoping that the scandal of Don Gonzalez's murder would by then be stale news. But the plazas were still humming with gossip. Ducking into the church's safety, Don Juan discovered that that the shadow of his crime stretched there too. He found himself gazing at the newly completed sepulchre, surmounted by a stone statue of the murdered man. With a sardonic laugh, he reached up to tweak the sculpted beard. Then, with ironic politeness, he invited the effigy to do him the honor of dining with him at the earliest convenience. That night, a hollow knocking resounded through the inn where Don Juan was staying. In the doorway loomed a man of stone. As the servants fled in horror, the statue sat down to dinner with Don Juan. A fine roast chicken grew cold before the silent guest, and the silver wine goblet never touched his lips. But before he rose to leave, he invited Don Juan to sup with him in his chapel the next evening. For all his vices, Don Juan was a man of courage, and he did not flinch from accepting the statue's invitation. The supper that awaited him in the tomb proved to be a bitter feast. Scorpions and vipers washed down with draughts of gall and vinegar. Behaving with exquisite politeness, Don Juan did his best to swallow the repugnant morsels. When the meal ended, the guest rose to take his leave, but the stone statue seized his hand and held it in a grip that burned like molten metal. Struggling to free himself before his flesh had seared to the bone, Don Juan lashed with his sword, but the blade passed through the statue as if through empty air. When Don Juan begged for mercy, the statue announced that the time for forgiveness has passed. All that awaited Don Juan now were the fires of hell, and the old man's ghost had all eternity to which to savor its revenge. No one ever found Don Juan's body, thus it was impossible to ascertain whether he died of the poison he had eaten, or the statue's searing touch, or simply the terror. But the storytellers could account for his disappearance. The sepulchre's lid swung open, they said, releasing white-hot flames and the stench of brimstone and sulfur. Then, with a dull thud and that thundered in the dark streets of Seville, it closed once more, entombing Don Juan and his enemy together. Potabesso. No picture with it. Alright, here we got one here. Following instructions given in a dream to Lady Lisabetta found a corpse of her murdered lover. Unable to disinter the body of her beloved, she severed his head and spirited it home to mourn over at her leisure. Tale of Demon Bride. Let's see what this is about. A Chinese pilgrim departing from a lakeside temple was hailed by two figures in the water's edge. Returning, he found a lady in white mourning robes and her handmaid, who were stranded on the shore, and begged for his assistance. Investigating reports of a crime, the city guards broke into the home of the white-clad lady, where they greeted by an apparition of snowy robes. The figure vanished before their eyes, leaving no trace but a pile of silver coin. A snake and a fish in a bowl. Trapped at the behest of a priest who knew them to be demons, the lady and her servants shifted shape, becoming a white snake and a small blue fish. We got a couple of sports stories here. We'll go ahead and read these. Vanity's reflection. Now we got the, caption here: spurning the charms of the girls of Greece, Narcissus finally found the object of his love, his own reflection in a pool. Let's go and read the whole thing. No bard or troubadour ever sang more poignantly of love lost than the poets of ancient Greece, who told how the gods made cruel sport of the affections of humans. Among the victims of the capricious Olympians was Narcissus, fairest of mortal youths. With his dark hair and marble skin, Narcissus won the love of every girl who looked upon him. All being available, he was attracted to none and spurned their advances. Meeting rejection, their love turned to hatred. One embittered maiden called upon Nemesis, goddess of revenge, to make Narcissus in his turn suffer the pangs of unrequited love. The goddess answered the girl's prayer. To lead the youth astray, she used the hapless wood nymph Echo, whose fate it was to be able to only to repeat the last words of any remark made to her. So it happened that when Narcissus, hunting deer, became lost in the forest and called out for aid, the sole reply he received was his own cry, softly reiterated in the nymph's sibilant tones. Pursuing the gentle music, the youth was drawn deeper and deeper into the woods until he came to a clearing where water lilies dabbled a still pond. There, leaning over the bank to drink, Narcissus finally found an object of his passion, his own reflection in the limpid waters. From that moment on, he knelt sodded beside the pool. Now and again, he reached to embrace the perfect creature who looked up at him, but the image would disappear. His fingers disturbed the water. Stricken by unfulfilled love, he wasted away until all that remains of his beauty was a white and gold flower that bears his name. As for Echo, she remained faithful to the young man she had unwittingly led astray. Her disembodied voice continued to haunt the forest glades. Let's see, the caption of this talks about, by a miraculous transformation, the nymph Daphne escaped the clutches of the love-hungry Apollo. The next one, Thesbe was kept from her lover, but only by wall's thickness. Doomed tryst is what it says on the side here. Let me position this. The arrows of Eros, trickster god of love, were of two sorts. When gold-tipped, they roused passion. If pointed with lead, they deadened it. Sometimes the mischievous boy would use a contrary weapon to set two things against one another. To avenge an insult, he had enamored the sun god Apollo to the nymph Daphne, while making her reject his advances. Through the glades of Olympus, the two ran, not in lovers' play, but in deadly earnest of the hunt. Daphne could not long escape. No one was as swift as mighty Apollo. By a moment of capture, though, she cried to the river god, who was her father, and he stole her from the sun god's grasp. Her downy skin hardened into bark, her limbs froze into branches. She was transformed into a laurel tree, and ever after Apollo swore the wreaths of laurel in memory of her. When even a god's loves went awry, it was no wonder that the mortal path was harder still, and no human couple was more unfortunate than Paramus and Thesbe. The poets do not say which heavenly being confounded their fate, but from the start their loves were ill started. Their families, though neighbors, were deadly enemies. The only way the pair could whisper their passions was through the crack in a wall that joined their houses. Finally, destruction drove them to arrange a tryst in the dangerous woods outside the city. Thisbe was first to arrive, but seeing a lioness prowling nearby, she fled, dropping her shawl with the beast spotted and mauled. Paramus, finding the garments stained with blood from the animal's maws, thought his beloved dead. Having no reason to go on living, he impaled himself on his sword. Thisbe returned in time to see him dying. Caught in fate's inexorable web, she used the weapon to gain the solace of death. Sounds very Romeo and Juliet there. Interesting picture here. The obsession. I see a man, observing, people riding horses. On a journey through a stony wasteland, a sculptor saw a lady riding the woods. Though she barely glanced at him as she passed by, he surrendered up his heart and soul for love of her. Let's see. And see another older man in a castle far and away. In the shadow of the castle he had hewn with his own hands the artist learned that his inamorata had married another man. A warlock's comeuppance. When a Scottish warlock attempted to seduce a maiden by magic, his efforts went awry. Tricked by his intended victim, the charm that had intended to arouse her lust for him worked its powers on her heifer instead. He found himself pursued all over the village by the lovesick animal. The ill-starred mating of the earth and sea. Another story taken somewhere in Asia. Japan, it looks like. No caption, so I'm just going to have to show off the art, and I don't want to read this story. Alright. But that is a cool beast there. I cannot lie, that is cool. It looks like an underwater city. And a huge tsunami. Someone's up on a tree there. But looks like he, just one found a child. True love triumphant. That is a little short spot, it seems. Oh, just a story by itself. So we'll focus on a picture. I'll go ahead and read this. In the old chronicles, love often came to a joyous conclusion, but only after its subjects had suffered. Ritual ordeals of perils and forced partings were necessary rites of passage before a union was deemed worthy to endure. The commonest trial was a separation. Sometimes the lovers were sundered by the edict of a hard-hearted parent, desperate to avert a match that brought neither gold nor glory. In other stories, a painful severance might be brought about by the fortuitous arrival of the band of pirates bent on kidnap by one partner's own weakness and folly, or by machinations of the enemy, human or otherwise, who, though through envy or less fathomable motives, wished the couple ill. By the most terrifying tales, the lovers were driven apart by death. But so powerful was love that it could, vanquish even this grim adversary. Legend from opposite ends of the earth told of heroes who pursued a beloved even beyond grave, and brought their mate back once more to the land of the living. Excuse me. The accounts of these struggles taught, above all else, that love was far more than a mere convergence of lust and liking. It was an elemental force within the universe. The inspiration for great deeds, and the impetus for poetry, the driving force of life itself. Soldier of the Saracen maid. In battle, Al-Qasim was an unwilling knight. Barred from courtship, Al-Qasim met his love, Nicolette, in secret. In Torelore, wars were fought with rotten fruit and cheese. I always found this picture funny. Captured in a pirate raid, Nicolette was parted from her lover. The words of minstrel songs led Akasan to his lost lady. Rescue from the underworld. Now, this is a very disturbing picture. Clinging to a plated vine, the Polynesian hero Hiku descended, to the place where the dead dwell, a chasm beyond the horizon. He sought to rescue his love, who had languished and died for want of his company. Let's see. Travails of an Indian Queen. Let's see. Nala, the lovesick Indian prince, sent a swan to plead his cause with the lady Damayanti. Landing in Damayanti's garden, the bird lured her away from her handmaidens to deliver its entrusted message. Here we go. Some more of this. When the prince led Damayanti around the sacred nuptial fires, it seemed as if their match was smiled upon by all gods. But a jealous demon thwarted in his own designs upon the bride, was already plotting to blight their union. Despite all his virtue, Nala possessed one fatal weakness. He gambled compulsively, staking even more of his domains and fortunes on the toss of a dice. Emerging from the forest into the royal city, the half-clad Damayanti endured the mockery of a jeering mob. But a queen spied her suffering from the palace and secured her. And it goes on. Let's see. The Enchanter's Snare. Those who despaired of fair dealings in love might find hope in the lay of medieval poets saying of a Breton couple's fortunate deliverance. Arviragus and his lady Dorigens was so enamored that even the briefest parting was torture. When Arviragus was sent by his lord on a mission to England, Dorigen refused to be consoled. Day after day, she paced the cliff, gazing at the jagged rocks below, imagining her beloved shipwreck before he could return to her arms. One morning, a young squire of her acquaintance named Aurelius fell into step beside her and confided that the passion for her had long burned in his breast. Dorigen replied without pause that she would never betray her husband. Then she jestingly qualified her abrupt refusal. She would welcome Aurelius's embraces, she declared, on the day he rid the coast of Brittany of its treacherous rocks. Tortured by his love for Dorigens, Aurelius turned to an astrologer famed for creating illusions more real than life. Aurelius offered a princely sum, if the sage could make the rocks of Brittany disappear for a week. The learned man calculated the conjectures of the planet most favorable for his magic. At the due hour, the Brittany coast seemed to flatten to perfectly smooth, sandy curves. When Dorigen's next glanced from her window, she was dumbfounded. With horror, she recalled her promise. That night, Arviragus returned home. Dorigen told him all. The knight declared that since the very foundation of their marriage was honesty, she must keep her word to the squire. Afterward, Arviragus would accept her back. When Aurelius learned of this exchange, he was so moved by Dorigen's distress and by her husband's nobility of mind that he at once relinquished his claims. And the astrologer, not wishing to be outdone in chivalry, waived his fee. They've all been quite adults about it. Deathless devotion. I've looked through these 100 times, but I never remembered this picture here. A young Tibetan herdsman pledged his troth to his beloved by plaiting an earring into her hair. She accepted both, the gift and the trouble she knew it would bring. Refusing to endure life without her murdered lover, the girl flung herself on the funeral pyre before the eyes of the startled mourners. I do remember this picture. From the lovers' graves grew two great trees, like longing arms. Their branches reached forward one another and clung together, resisting any effort of weather or wind to part them. And this is the last story of the book of a knight and his lady lost. You see, it looks like a coffin there, or a burial place. Pictures are neat. There's like an ogre troll down here in the corner. Guess he's probably defeated him. Now that is a cool classic picture of a knight up against a dragon. Of course, in this story, there's also a griffin as well. of course, it's stealing a child. Cool jousting picture here. And it looks like, you know, all of them ended up getting married. Hopefully living happily ever after. And that is it. So, there you go. That is Stories from the Lore of Love of the Enchanted World. Thank you all for watching. You all try have a nice day.